After almost a decade, Disney and Pixar are bringing back Woody, Buzz, and the whole gang to break all our hearts again. The original Toy Story premiered almost 25 years ago, and it started a long and fruitful partnership between the two studios that gave us some of the best animated films ever made. And Cars 2. Unlike Disney's animated films, which typically source their stories from history, folktales, and literature in the public domain, Pixar has been able to capture our hearts and minds with completely original concepts and characters. So what's their secret? Sure, the studio is made up of a brain trust of brilliant writers, directors, and artists who all collaborate with each other to bring their ideas to life, but what is it about those ideas that so effectively speaks to our emotions and imaginations? It may be that they tap into something so deep within the human psyche that it predates even our own history. No, we're not talking about the good dinosaur, we're talking about anthropomorphism. You don't have to be a children's psychologist to figure out that kids love talking animals and objects. Just look at, like, any kids' movie or TV show. It's become such a staple of children's entertainment that it's made its way into satirical adult entertainment, just to give it that extra push into absurdity. This practice of assigning human attributes to non-human entities is known as anthropomorphism, and it goes way beyond just media. It's a concept that plays into everything from religion to psychology and even artificial intelligence. It's so innate to human understanding that you've probably done it today without even realizing it. Have you ever yelled at your phone for not working properly? Well, you'd be shocked to find out that not only can your phone not hear you, it wouldn't give a crap what you have to say, even if it could.
It's an inanimate object.
You're an inanimate object!
Anthropomorphism is a cognitive bias, something that the brain does naturally despite all logic to the contrary. As humans, we tend to base our understanding of the world around us on our understanding of ourselves and the people in our lives. We're social creatures after all, and our survival has always depended on our ability to communicate with one another. So it makes sense that the human brain would naturally assign personhood to animals, objects, and even the weather in its attempt to understand these things. Early religious beliefs that we now call animism asserted that the natural world was controlled by spirits. Animals, plants, mountains, and even whole forests were all imbued with spirits, much like the human soul. Rather than being a strict belief system, anthropologists suggest that this was merely a way for primitive societies to understand and talk about the world around them. If you don't know the complexities of the Earth's weather systems, it's much easier to say something like, "Oh, the sky is angry today." Some anthropologists even link this behavior to the formation of religion itself. As animism gave way to polytheism, the personification of nature took the form of gods, who still controlled the natural world according to their own whims, unless of course they could be swayed by prayers, rituals, or even sacrifices. The ancient Greeks were especially good at this, even going so far as to anthropomorphize abstract concepts of love, time, and death. One of the first psychological experiments to address anthropomorphism, aptly enough, came in the form of animation. In 1944, psychologists Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel showed subjects a short animation of various shapes moving about on a screen. When asked to describe what they saw, the subjects couldn't help but project personalities, objectives, and feelings onto the shapes that they were watching. The researchers concluded that when there's no apparent cause for an object's motion, people automatically view the object as an intentional agent.
Claw is our master. Claw chooses who will go and who will stay.
This is ludicrous.
Anthropomorphism is so innate to human behavior that scientists are taught to actively avoid using it in their studies, as it tends to conflict with the idea of objective observation. Biologists in particular have always been conflicted about inadvertently treating animals as if they have human thoughts or feelings. Ivan Pavlov, the original dog whisperer, wrote that animals should be considered, quote, without any need to resort to fantastic speculations as to the existence of any possible subjective states. Even the guy who explained how animals became animals, Charles Darwin, was accused of this scientific taboo in his Anecdotes on Animal Behavior. Similarly, those working in the field of artificial intelligence understandably use anthropomorphic shorthand to describe the behaviors of the technology they create. And they're constantly warned by the greater scientific community not to assume that mental states exist in non-mental technologies. So if anthropomorphism is a default cognitive function that adults have to consciously avoid, it makes sense that it would appeal more to children. After all, studies have shown that children use this cognitive function more so than adults, given their lack of experience with non-human entities. But that's something that movie and TV studios figured out a long time ago. In fact, many early Disney animated movies drew upon earlier examples of anthropomorphism from literature and mythology. But Pixar takes this practice to a whole new level. While most animation studios are content to crank out movie after movie featuring intelligent animals, Pixar asks us to imagine sentience in all kinds of things, from toys and cars to even our own fears and emotions. Through their feature-length and short films, they've used anthropomorphism to make audiences feel connected to clouds, volcanoes, dumplings, and I don't know, whatever this is. And for the most part, all of these non-human characters seem to occupy the same world as humans do. In this way, Pixar asks us to imagine that unseen worlds exist within our own world, rather than creating separate realities for their stories to take place in. And the stories they tell within those worlds enable us to imagine what's possible for ours. Literature professor Jack Halberstam wrote a whole book on the genre of animated children's films that he dubs Pixar Vault, in which certain topics that would never appear in adult-themed films are central to the success and emotional impact of these narratives. And it's the very fact that the characters we relate to are non-human that allows for this to happen. He writes, animated feature films draw much of their dramatic intensity from the struggle between human and non-human creatures, and that they are deeply interested in social hierarchies, quite curious about the relations between an outside and an inside world, and powered by a vigorous desire for revolution, transformation, and rebellion. This is perfectly encapsulated in the first Toy Story film, in which all of the toys have little to no agency beyond the whims of their owners, much to the dismay of any toy that ends up in Sid's bedroom. In fact, it's Buzz's delusion that he isn't a toy that sets Woody along the path to the agency that eventually frees them from Sid's maniacal grasp. Along the way, they're confronted with all kinds of philosophical problems that would normally be hard to digest for most adult audiences, let alone children. Free will, religious dogma, individualist rebellion, all are embodied by various children's toys in a way that most academic scholars would envy. Halberstam finds a similarly complex world presented in Monsters, Inc., in which fear generates revenue for corporate barons and the screams of children actually power the city of Monstropolis. He notes that this direct link between fear and profit is more pointed in this children's feature than in most adult films. But despite all odds, the bond between the child and the monster she is supposed to fear wins out, and in doing so, inadvertently overthrows the entire economic and political establishment of their world, creating a new one driven not by fear but by happiness. As Halberstam puts it, a cynical critic might find this narrative to be a blueprint for the normative rites of passage in the human life cycle. A more radical reading allows the narrative to be utopian, to tell of the real change that children may still believe is possible and desirable. Pixar doesn't just tell us stories using animals and objects as characters, they ask us to imagine entirely new worlds within our own. And more importantly, they invite us to imagine that these worlds, and vicariously our world, can be made better by the multitude of different persons that inhabit it, whether they're actual people or not. So the next time you feel like screaming at your computer, or you just think a creepy doll is staring at you, or you feel like the universe is somehow out to get you, remember that your brain is probably just playing one of its oldest tricks on you. Except for Chucky, that dude's real, and he's coming to get you.